Lauren knew she'd made a mistake the moment her car started making that grinding sound. She was taking a shortcut. A stupid, ill-advised shortcut through the industrial district because her GPS had promised it would save 15 minutes on her commute home from the hospital. 15 minutes that now felt incredibly not worth it as her 10-year-old sedan coughed, shuddered, and then simply died in the middle of a street that looked like something out of a post-apocalyptic movie. Empty warehouses on both sides. Broken streetlights. Graffiti-covered walls. Not another car in sight. And it was nearly 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night, in a part of the city where even delivery drivers refused to go after dark. Lauren tried the ignition. Nothing. Tried again. Still nothing. The dashboard lights were completely dead, which probably meant something catastrophic with the battery or alternator, or one of those other car parts she knew existed but didn't actually understand. She pulled out her phone. No signal. Of course. Because this night was apparently determined to go from bad to worse in record time. Lauren sat in her dead car on a deserted street in the worst part of the city and tried not to panic. She had options. She could wait for her phone to find signal and call for help. She could get out and start walking toward the main road, which was maybe a mile away. She could lock the doors and hope that a AA somehow miraculously found her despite the lack of phone signal. All of those options felt terrible. Waiting meant sitting alone and vulnerable. Walking meant exposing herself on dark streets. And hope had never been much of a survival strategy. Movement caught her attention in the rearview mirror. Headlights approaching from behind, moving slowly down the empty street. Lauren's first instinct was relief. Someone else was here. Someone who might be able to help, or at least call for assistance. Then the car got closer, and her relief transformed into unease. It was an expensive vehicle. Something sleek and black that probably cost more than she made in a year. And in this neighborhood, and in this neighborhood, and in this neighborhood, and expensive cars meant one of two things. People who were very lost or people who had business here that normal citizens didn't want to know about. The car pulled up behind hers and stopped. The headlights stayed on, casting Lauren's broken-down sedan in harsh white light. She couldn't see the driver through the glare, couldn't tell if this was help or a new problem replacing her old one. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out, silhouetted against the headlights. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with a kind of controlled grace that suggested either military training or something less legal. He wore dark clothing that made him blend into the shadows. And as he approached her window, Lauren could see his face in the ambient light. Striking features, dark hair, and eyes that were so intense they made her breath catch. Not with attraction exactly, but with awareness. This was someone who noticed everything, assessed threats automatically, and probably had experience with violence that she couldn't begin to imagine. Car trouble? His voice was low, controlled, carrying easily through her closed window. Lauren debated her options for about 2 seconds before cracking the window slightly. Being rude to someone offering help in this neighborhood seemed like a bad survival strategy, even if the helper looked more dangerous than her situation. "It just died," she said, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "No warning. Everything electrical is gone. Battery or alternator most likely." The man studied her car with professional efficiency. "Do you have anyone you can call?" "No signal." Lauren held up her phone as evidence. The man pulled out his own phone, checked it, and frowned. "I've got signal. You can use mine if you need to call someone." It was a reasonable offer, helpful even. But something about accepting this man's phone felt like crossing a line, like becoming indebted to someone she very much did not want to be indebted to. "That's okay," Lauren said carefully. "I'll just wait a bit and see if my signal comes back." The man's expression shifted, not quite a smile, but something that suggested he understood her hesitation and maybe even approved of it. That's smart. Not accepting help from strangers in this neighborhood. Shows good instincts. Then why are you offering? The question came out before Lauren could stop it. Because your instincts won't keep you safe if your car doesn't start and you're still sitting here in another hour. His voice was matter of fact. This area gets dangerous after midnight. Not the kind of dangerous where someone steals your car. The kind where people don't ask questions about what happened to Vehicles left abandoned overnight. The implied threat in those words made Lauren's stomach drop. Are you threatening me? No, the man's voice was firm. I'm telling you the reality of where you are so you can make informed decisions. Staying in your car waiting for phone signal is a bad plan. Walking to the main road alone is worse. Accepting help from a stranger is risky but probably your best option at this point. Lauren studied his face, trying to read intention behind the intense eyes and controlled demeanor. Everything about him screamed danger. The way he carried himself, the expensive car, the fact that he was comfortable in a neighborhood that terrified her. But he was also right. Her options were extremely limited, and pride wasn't worth her safety. What kind of help are you offering? She asked quietly. I can call a tow truck for you. Have them take your car to a shop and drop you somewhere safe. He paused. Or I can take a look myself, see if it's something simple I can fix. I'm not a mechanic, but I know enough about cars to handle basic problems. Both options required trusting him. The question was whether Lauren trusted him more than she trusted her ability to survive the next few hours alone. Why would you help me? Lauren asked. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. And you said yourself that good instincts mean not trusting strangers in this neighborhood. Something flickered in the man's expression, respect, maybe, or approval. Because I remember what it's like to be stranded and vulnerable. And because leaving someone in danger when you have the ability to help isn't the kind of man I'm trying to be. There was weight in those words, layers of meaning Lauren couldn't fully interpret. But she heard the honesty in his voice, the suggestion that helping her meant something beyond simple Good Samaritan impulses. Okay, she said, making the decision before she could second-guess it. You can look at the car. But I'm staying in here while you do it. Smart. The man stepped back from her window. Pop the hood. Lauren did, watching in her rearview mirror as he moved to the front of her car. He worked with efficient competence, checking things she couldn't see, his movements precise and practiced. After a few minutes, he returned to her window. Your battery cables are loose. Probably from vibration over time. I can tighten them, and your car should start. He pulled a small toolkit from his pocket, the kind of thing someone carried when they expected to need tools. Takes about 2 minutes, but you should get the battery and alternator checked soon. This is a temporary fix. You just happen to carry tools? Lauren asked. I happen to be prepared for common problems. His mouth curved slightly. Question is, do you want me to fix it, or do you want to call someone else? Lauren glanced at her still signal-less phone, at the empty street around them, at the man who'd appeared like something out of a story where mysterious strangers saved stranded travelers. Everything about this situation felt surreal and vaguely dangerous. But he was offering a simple solution, and she was out of better options. Fix it, she said. Please. He nodded and returned to the front of her car. Lauren watched him work, noticing the way he moved, controlled, efficient, like someone accustomed to operating in high-pressure situations. He wasn't just some good Samaritan who happened to know about cars. He was someone with specialized knowledge, the kind that came from experience with situations more complicated than car trouble. True to his word, it took less than 2 minutes. He closed her hood, wiped his hands on what looked like an expensive handkerchief, and returned to her window. Try it now. Lauren turned the key, and her car roared to life like it had never been dead. Relief flooded through her so intensely, it almost brought tears to her eyes. Thank you, she said, meaning it more than she'd meant anything in a long time. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stopped. You would have figured something out. The man's voice was certain. You've got good survival instincts. But I'm glad I could help make tonight easier. Lauren wanted to ask his name, wanted to understand who he was, and why he'd stopped to help a stranger in a neighborhood where most people wouldn't even slow down. But something held her back, the sense that knowing too much about this man might be more complicated than gratitude warranted. I should go, she said instead. Get out of this area before my car decides to die again. Good plan. The man stepped back from her car. Drive safe. And Lauren? Get that battery checked tomorrow. Don't put it off. Lauren froze. How do you know my name? The man gestured to her dashboard, and Lauren realized her hospital ID badge was clipped to the sun visor, her name clearly visible. "You're a nurse at Metropolitan General." "That's good work. Important work. Who are you?" Lauren asked, suddenly very aware that this stranger knew her name and where she worked while she knew nothing about him. "Someone who's glad your car broke down in front of me instead of someone else." His voice was quiet but certain. "Now go, before your luck runs out." He turned and walked back to his expensive car, moving with that same controlled grace. Lauren sat frozen for a moment, torn between the urge to follow him and demand answers and the stronger urge to get the hell out of this neighborhood while her car was still running. Self-preservation won. She put her car in drive and pulled away, watching in her rearview mirror as the mysterious stranger stood beside his vehicle, watching her leave. The headlights illuminated him one last time before she turned the corner. Tall, composed, dangerous even in stillness. Lauren drove towards safety, her heart still racing, her mind replaying every moment of the encounter. A stranger had stopped to help her in the most dangerous part of the city. Had fixed her car with practiced efficiency. Had known her name from her hospital badge, and hadn't tried to hide that he'd noticed it. She should be terrified. Should be reporting this to someone. Should be worried about what it meant that a dangerous-looking man now knew her name and workplace. Instead, she found herself wondering who he was. What had brought him to that street at that exact moment? Why helping her had felt like something more than simple good deed. It wasn't until she was home, safe in her apartment with her car parked in its assigned spot, that Lauren realized something that made her breath catch. She'd asked why he would help her. He'd said it was because he remembered being stranded and vulnerable. But everything about that man suggested he'd never been vulnerable a day in his life. He'd been too controlled, too confident, too comfortable with danger. Which meant he'd lied. Or he'd been talking about someone else he'd known who'd been stranded and vulnerable. Someone he'd failed to help or hadn't been there to protect. Lauren lay in bed that night, staring at her ceiling, thinking about intense eyes and controlled movements and the way the stranger had looked at her like she mattered. Like helping her had been important beyond simple assistance. She told herself to forget about it. To be grateful for the help and move on with her life. To not think about mysterious men who appeared on dark streets and fixed problems with unsettling competence. But she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. That somehow, the man who'd stopped to help her would reappear in her life. And she wasn't sure if that thought terrified her or thrilled her more. Lauren didn't see the mysterious stranger again for exactly 2 weeks. She got her battery checked the next day, as advised. The mechanic confirmed what her rescuer had said. Loose cables. Older battery that would need replacing soon, but nothing immediately catastrophic. He'd given her a temporary fix that had worked perfectly. She tried not to think about how the stranger had diagnosed her car problem in minutes, had carried the exact tools needed to fix it, had known precisely what to do without any hesitation. Those were skills that came from experience, from repeatedly dealing with situations where knowing how to fix a car quickly might mean the difference between safety and danger. Lauren told herself she was reading too much into it. That plenty of people knew basic car repair. That his competence didn't necessarily mean anything sinister. She almost believed it. Work at the hospital continued its usual chaotic pace. Lauren pulled double shifts, covered for colleagues, navigated the endless stream of emergencies that defined EA nursing. She was good at her job, had been doing it long enough that the intensity felt normal, manageable. It was during one of those double shifts nearly 14 hours into a day that had started at 6 a.m. that Lauren noticed him. She was in the hospital cafeteria, grabbing terrible coffee and a sandwich that would serve as both lunch and dinner, when she felt the weight of someone's attention. That prickle of awareness that came from being watched. Lauren turned and found him sitting at a table near the windows. The stranger from the dark street. Same intense eyes, same controlled presence, wearing expensive casual clothing that made him stand out among the tired medical staff and worried family members that populated the hospital cafeteria. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and something passed between them. Recognition, acknowledgement, something Lauren couldn't quite name but felt in her chest like electricity. He didn't approach. Didn't wave or smile or do anything to indicate they knew each other. He simply held her gaze for a long moment, then looked away, turning his attention back to the coffee cup in his hands. Lauren stood frozen with her sandwich and terrible coffee, trying to decide what to do. She could approach him, could ask what he was doing at her hospital, could demand to know if he was following her or if this was a coincidence. Or she could pretend she hadn't seen him, could go back to her shift and forget about the man who'd helped her on a dark street and was now apparently at her workplace. Professional responsibility won out over curiosity. She had patients waiting, couldn't afford to get distracted by mysterious strangers regardless of how intensely they looked at her or how much she wanted answers to. Questions she couldn't articulate. Lauren returned to the threw herself into work, and tried not to think about dark eyes watching her across a cafeteria. It wasn't until her shift ended, nearly 10 p.m. after 16 hours of controlled chaos, that she found him again. He was standing in the parking lot near her car, leaning against his expensive vehicle, looking like he'd been waiting for hours and was perfectly comfortable doing so. "Are you following me?" Lauren asked, too tired to be diplomatic about it. "Yes." The stranger's voice was matter-of-fact, no apology or justification. Just simple honesty. "Why?" Lauren stopped several feet away, maintaining distance despite her exhaustion. "What do you want?" "To make sure you're safe." He pushed off from his car, moving closer but stopping when Lauren tensed. "Your battery cables were loose 2 weeks ago. That doesn't just happen. Someone loosened them deliberately, leaving your car vulnerable to breaking down in exactly the kind of area where you'd be isolated and in danger." Lauren's stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" "Why would anyone deliberately? Because you treated a patient 3 weeks ago. Someone important who owed dangerous people money and was trying to disappear." The stranger's voice was calm but serious. "Those people couldn't find him directly, so they started looking at anyone who might know where he went, including the nurse who was on duty when he came in with injuries he claimed were from a fall." Lauren remembered the patient. Mid-30s, clearly lying about how he'd gotten bruised ribs and a split lip, had been terrified and kept looking at the doors like he expected someone to burst through them. She'd treated him, filed her report, and thought nothing more of it beyond the usual sadness that came from knowing someone was in a bad situation she couldn't fix. "You're saying someone sabotaged my car to strand me? To what? Question me about a patient?" Lauren heard the disbelief in her own voice even as a cold understanding was settling in her gut. "To use you as leverage." The stranger stepped closer, and Lauren could see the intensity in his eyes that she remembered from their first encounter. "They wanted to find out what you knew, and stranding you was meant to make you vulnerable enough to accept help from the wrong people. People who would have extracted information in ways you really don't want to imagine. And you just happened to show up instead?" Lauren's voice was sharp with fear disguised as anger. "How convenient. How do I know you're not one of those wrong people?" "Because if I were, you'd already know it." His voice was quiet but certain. "And because I've spent the last 2 weeks making sure no one else tries what they failed to accomplish that night." Lauren stared at him, processing this impossible information. "Who are you?" "Someone who operates in the same spaces as the people looking for your patient. Someone who heard about their plans and made sure I got to you first." He paused. "My name is Sebastian Moretti. I run private security for people who need protection from exactly the kind of threats you're currently facing." "I'm not facing any threats." But even as Lauren said it, she was remembering the strange feeling of being watched over the past 2 weeks. The car that seemed to show up in her rearview mirror too often on her commute home. The phone calls from numbers that immediately hung up when she answered. "You are." Sebastian's voice was firm. "And they're escalating because questioning you didn't work and they're getting desperate to find their missing debtor. Which means you need protection until either he's found or the people looking for him move on to other strategies." "Protection from you?" Lauren laughed without humor. "The guy who admits he operates in the same criminal spaces as the people threatening me? Why would I trust you?" "Because I'm telling you the truth instead of letting you stay ignorant." Sebastian pulled something from his pocket, a card, simple black with a phone number embossed in silver. "And because in about 3 hours, someone is going to approach you. They'll seem friendly, concerned. They'll have a cover story about why they need to talk to you about that patient. And if you talk to them without protection, you'll tell them everything you know and probably some things you don't even realize you know." "How do you..." Lauren started. I know because I'm very good at what I do. And what I do is understand how dangerous people operate. Sebastian held out the card. Take this. Keep it with you. When they approach you tonight, call this number. I'll be there in less than 5 minutes and I'll handle it. And if I don't call, if I just talk to them and tell them I don't know anything, then they won't believe you. And you'll find out exactly how persuasive desperate criminals can be when they think you're holding back information. Sebastian's voice was gentle despite the harsh words. I'm not trying to scare you, Lauren. I'm trying to keep you safe from people who won't care that you're just a nurse who happened to treat the wrong patient. Lauren took the card, her hand shaking slightly. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. What do you get out of protecting me? Sebastian was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face. Peace of mind. The knowledge that someone good, someone who helps people for a living, isn't going to suffer because I could have prevented it but didn't. There was something in his voice, pain, maybe, or regret about past situations where he hadn't been able to help. Lauren found herself wanting to understand what had happened to make this dangerous man care so much about protecting a stranger. Okay, she said quietly. I'll keep the card. But Sebastian? If this is some elaborate scheme to manipulate me into trusting you, I'm going to be extremely angry. And I have friends in law enforcement who will care about what happens to me. Good. Sebastian's mouth curved in something that might have been approval. You should have people who care about your safety. And you should absolutely be cautious about trusting me. Just don't let that caution prevent you from calling when you need help. He moved back to his car, and Lauren noticed for the first time that it wasn't alone. There was another vehicle parked nearby, and she could see a figure in the driver's seat. Security detail. Sebastian hadn't been alone this whole time. One more thing. Sebastian called before getting in his car. Lock your doors tonight. Don't answer unexpected knocks. And don't go anywhere alone until this situation is resolved. How long will that take? Days, maybe a week. Sebastian's voice carried across the parking lot. I'm working on finding your patient and either getting him somewhere safe or resolving his debt situation. Once that's handled, the threat to you disappears. And until then, I'm your shadow. Whether you see me or not. His eyes held hers across the distance. You're safe, Lauren. I promise you that. But you need to trust me enough to call if anything feels wrong. He got in his car and drove away, leaving Lauren standing in the parking lot with a black card in her hand and 1,000 questions spinning through her mind. She went home, locked her doors, and tried to convince herself that this was all an overreaction. That Sebastian was exaggerating the danger to make himself seem necessary. That she was perfectly safe and didn't need protection from a stranger who operated in criminal spaces and looked at her like she was something worth protecting. 3 hours later, exactly as Sebastian had predicted, there was a knock on her door. Lauren looked through the peephole to see a woman in her 40s, professional clothing, concerned expression. Someone who looked harmless, trustworthy, exactly the kind of person you'd open your door for without hesitation. Hi, I'm sorry to bother you so late, the woman called through the door. I'm from the hospital's patient advocacy office. There's been a situation with the patient you treated a few weeks ago, and I need to ask you some questions about his care. It's urgent, or I wouldn't be here at this hour. Every word sounded reasonable, professional, exactly the kind of thing that might actually happen in Lauren's line of work. But Sebastian had said they'd have a cover story, that they'd seem friendly and concerned, that they'd make it seem urgent to prevent her from thinking too carefully about whether to cooperate. Lauren's hand closed around the black card in her pocket. She pulled out her phone and dialed the number. Sebastian answered before the first ring finished. I'm 2 minutes away. Don't open the door. Don't engage with her. Just stay quiet until I get there. Okay. Lauren's voice was barely a whisper. You're safe. Sebastian's voice was calm and certain. I promised you that. Now trust me. Lauren ended the call and stood with her back against her door, listening to the woman outside knock again. Call her name, say something about hospital protocol requiring this conversation. She didn't open the door. Didn't respond. Just waited. Less than 2 minutes later, she heard another voice. Male, controlled, with an authority that made the woman immediately stop talking. She's not answering because she knows you're not from the hospital. Sebastian's voice carried through the door. And you're going to leave now? Before I make this a problem you can't walk away from. I don't know what the woman started. Yes, you do. Sebastian's voice dropped to something that made Lauren shiver despite being on the safe side of the door. You're going to walk away. You're going to tell whoever sent you that this approach didn't work. And you're going to make sure no one comes back here. Because Lauren is under protection now, and anyone who threatens her will deal with me. Are we clear? Silence. Then footsteps moving away fast. A gentle knock on Lauren's door. It's Sebastian. She's gone. You can open up. Lauren opened the door to find Sebastian standing in her hallway, looking completely composed despite whatever had just happened. How did you? I told you. I'm your shadow. Sebastian's eyes scanned her face, checking for distress. Are you okay? I'm terrified. Lauren's voice shook. Everything you said was true. They really are after me. Because I treated a patient. Because I did my job. I know. Sebastian moved closer but didn't touch her, respecting her space. But you're safe now. I've made it very clear that approaching you again will have consequences they don't want to face. For how long? Lauren asked. How long until they try again? They won't. Sebastian's voice was certain. Trust me on that. I have a reputation in certain circles, and threatening people under my protection is something no one does twice. Lauren wanted to ask what that meant. Wanted to understand what kind of man Sebastian Moretti really was, and what he'd done to earn a reputation that made dangerous people back off. But she was too tired and too scared to handle more revelations tonight. Thank you, she said instead. For being right. For being here. For keeping your promise. You're welcome. Sebastian pulled out his phone. I'm having someone come stay outside your building tonight. Just as a precaution. You won't see them, but they'll make sure no one else tries to approach you. Is this going to be my life now? Living with bodyguards I can't see? Just for a few days. Sebastian's voice was gentle. I'm close to resolving this situation. Once it's handled, you go back to normal. Like this never happened. Except it did happen. Lauren leaned against her doorframe, exhaustion and adrenaline making her legs weak. And now I know that treating the wrong patient can make me a target. That's not something I can unknow. No, it's not. Sebastian studied her face with that intense attention she was coming to recognize. But knowing means you're prepared. Aware. That's better than ignorant and vulnerable. He was right, but that didn't make the knowledge easier to carry. Get some sleep, Sebastian said quietly. You're safe. I promise you that. And when this is over, I'll explain everything you want to know about who I am and why protecting you matters so much to me. He left before Lauren could respond, disappearing down the hallway with that controlled grace. Lauren locked her door, set her alarm, and tried to sleep despite knowing that somewhere outside her building, invisible security was watching over her. Somewhere in the city, dangerous people had just learned that she was protected by someone more dangerous than they were. And somewhere, a man named Sebastian Moretti was working to resolve a situation that had put her in danger, motivated by something more personal than simple Good Samaritan impulses. Lauren fell asleep thinking about intense eyes and controlled movements and the way Sebastian had looked at her like keeping her safe was the most important thing in the world. And wondering what it meant that she was starting to trust him despite every reason she shouldn't. The situation resolved itself in 4 days, just as Sebastian had predicted. Lauren never learned all the details. Sebastian said it was better if she didn't know exactly how he'd handled it. But apparently the missing patient had been located and his death situation resolved in ways that satisfied everyone involved. The people looking for him no longer had reason to question anyone connected to his hospital visit, including the nurse who treated him. Lauren was safe. The invisible security detail disappeared. Life returned to something resembling normal. Except Sebastian kept showing up, not intrusively. Not stalking or following. Just appearing at the hospital cafeteria during her lunch breaks. In the parking lot when her shift ended. At the coffee shop near her apartment on Sunday mornings when she went to get her weekly indulgent latte. He never pushed for conversation, never demanded her attention. Just nodded in acknowledgement, sometimes offered a small smile, and gave her space to decide whether she wanted to engage. It took 3 chance encounters before Lauren realized they weren't chance at all. Sebastian was checking on her, making sure she was truly safe. Or maybe, and this was the possibility that made her chest feel warm in ways she couldn't quite examine, he just wanted to see her. On the 4th encounter, Lauren made the decision to engage. She was at the coffee shop, as had become her Sunday routine, when Sebastian walked in. This time, instead of pretending she hadn't noticed him, she gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Are you going to keep mysteriously appearing in places I frequent, or are we going to actually have a conversation about whatever this is?" Lauren kept her voice light despite her racing heart. Sebastian's mouth curved in a real smile, the first she'd seen from him, and it transformed his face entirely. Made him look younger, more approachable, though no less intense. "I'd prefer the conversation option if you're offering." "I'm offering." Lauren nodded to the chair. "Sit. Talk. Explain why you're still checking on me when the threat is gone and you have no professional obligation to care what happens to me anymore." Sebastian sat with that controlled grace she'd noticed from their first meeting. "Would you believe I'm just making sure the resolution actually stuck? That no one's changed their mind about leaving you alone?" "No." Lauren met his eyes directly. "Because if that were true, you'd be invisible like your security detail was. You're not checking on me from a distance. You're making yourself visible. Which means this is personal, not professional. You're very observant." Sebastian's voice held approval. "Most people don't notice when they're being watched. I'm a nurse. Observing details is part of my job." Lauren took a sip of her latte, trying to appear more composed than she felt. "So are you going to tell me the truth, or should I just accept that I have a mysterious guardian who shows up randomly and never explains himself?" Sebastian was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face like he was making an important decision. Then quietly, "I'm checking on you because I want to. Because knowing you're safe isn't enough, I need to see it. Because you matter to me in ways that have nothing to do with the protection job and everything to do with the person you are." The honesty in his words hit Lauren harder than any deflection would have. "You don't know me. We've had maybe 3 real conversations, all of them centered around danger and protection. How can I matter to you?" "Because I've seen who you are in crisis," Sebastian said simply. "I've seen you be smart and cautious when your car broke down in a dangerous area. I've seen you trust your instincts when someone came to your door with a believable cover story. I've seen you continue showing up for work and taking care of patients even when you knew you were being threatened." He paused. "You're strong and brave and genuinely good in ways that are rare in the world I operate in, and that matters to me." "You matter to me." Lauren felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. She should probably be more cautious. Should remember that Sebastian operated in criminal spaces and had a reputation that made dangerous people back off. Should protect herself from getting involved with someone whose life was infinitely more complicated than her own. But she found herself wanting to know him. Really know him. Beyond the controlled exterior and mysterious protector persona. "Tell me something real," Lauren said quietly. "Not about protection or threats or your work. Something about you. The person behind all the intensity and careful control." Sebastian leaned back in his chair, and Lauren could see him debating what to share. "I read philosophy. Particularly Stoic philosophy. Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca. There's something about their writing on control and acceptance that resonates with the life I've built." It wasn't what Lauren expected. Philosophy? "I have a degree in it, actually. From before I took over my father's business and everything became about security and protection and operating in spaces most people avoid." Sebastian's voice held something that might have been regret. "I wanted to be a professor once. Teach ethics and logic to bored undergraduates. Instead, I became someone who has to think very carefully about what ethics means in gray areas where traditional morality doesn't always apply." Lauren processed this unexpected revelation. "Do you regret it? Taking over your father's business instead of teaching?" "Sometimes." Sebastian's voice was honest. "But I'm good at what I do. And the work matters, even if it's complicated." Protecting people who can't protect themselves. Navigating situations where normal security wouldn't be enough. There's value in that, even when the methods are questionable. Is that what I was? Someone who needed protection beyond what normal security could provide. Yes. Sebastian met her eyes steadily. The people looking for your patient wouldn't have been deterred by police or hospital security. They needed someone who operated in their world and could communicate in language they understood. That's what I provided. By threatening them, Lauren kept her voice neutral. By making it clear that the cost of pursuing you was higher than any benefit they'd gain. Sebastian's voice was matter-of-fact. I didn't hurt anyone. I just leveraged reputation and connections to change their risk-benefit calculation. It should have sounded cold, calculating. Instead, it sounded pragmatic and honest about the realities of the world Sebastian operated in. Thank you, Lauren said quietly. For protecting me. For being honest about how you did it. For caring enough to keep checking on me, even after the job was done. You're welcome. Sebastian paused. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you become a nurse? It's dangerous, exhausting, emotionally draining work. What made you choose it? Lauren thought about her answer, surprised by how much she wanted to be honest with him. Because I wanted to help people in their most vulnerable moments. To be the person who makes crisis a little less terrifying, who provides care and compassion when people are at their worst. She smiled slightly. I know that sounds idealistic, maybe naive. But it's true. It's not naive. Sebastian's voice was warm. It's exactly the kind of motivation that makes someone genuinely good at what they do. You help people because you care, not because it's professionally required. That's rare. So are mysterious security consultants who quote Stoic philosophy and protect strangers because it gives them peace of mind. Lauren found herself leaning forward, drawn into the conversation in ways she hadn't expected. Tell me more. About your work, your life. The person you're trying to be despite operating in gray areas. They talked for 2 hours in that coffee shop, conversation flowing easily despite the unusual circumstances of their meeting. Lauren learned that Sebastian lived alone in a minimalist apartment, that he had a younger sister he was extremely protective of, that he was trying to gradually move his business toward more legitimate work while maintaining relationships with clients who still needed his particular skill set. Sebastian learned that Lauren had wanted to be a doctor but couldn't afford medical school, that she volunteered at free clinics on her days off, that she'd moved to the city 3 years ago to escape a relationship that had been slowly suffocating her independence. It was easy and complicated and felt like the beginning of something neither of them had planned but both wanted to explore. When they finally left the coffee shop, Lauren found herself not wanting the conversation to end. Can I see you again? Intentionally, I mean. Not just random appearances where I pretend to be surprised. I'd like that. Sebastian smiled. That real, transformative expression that made him look less dangerous and more human. Dinner? Somewhere nice. A proper date where we're not discussing threats or protection or anything complicated. That sounds perfect. Lauren pulled out her phone. Give me your number. Your actual number, not the emergency protection line. Sebastian rattled off a number, and Lauren saved it with his name. I'll text you. We'll figure out when we're both free and where to go. Looking forward to it. Sebastian moved closer, and Lauren could smell his cologne. Something subtle and expensive that somehow fit him perfectly. Lauren, thank you. For what? For giving me a chance despite having every reason to be cautious. For seeing past the dangerous exterior to the person underneath. For making me feel like maybe I'm more than just the work I do and the reputation I carry. Lauren reached out, touching his arm gently. You are more. Much more. And I'm looking forward to learning exactly how much more. They parted ways with promises to text and plans forming for a date that felt simultaneously thrilling and terrifying in its normalcy. No threats, no protection needs. Just two people who wanted to know each other beyond the crisis that had brought them together. Lauren went home thinking about philosophy degrees and Stoic principles and a man who'd built his life around protecting people but seemed desperately in need of someone seeing him as worth knowing beyond his ability to keep others safe. And Sebastian drove away thinking about a nurse who cared for strangers professionally, but had somehow made him feel cared for personally in ways no one had in longer than he could remember. Sometimes the person you rescued ended up rescuing you right back. Their first official date was at a small Italian restaurant that Sebastian said had the best pasta in the city and valued privacy for guests who preferred not to be noticed. Lauren dressed carefully, not too formal, but nice enough to show she'd made an effort. She was nervous in ways she hadn't been since she was a teenager on her first date. This was different from their coffee shop conversation. This was intentional, romantic, a clear statement that what was developing between them was more than just gratitude and protection. Sebastian met her at the restaurant looking devastatingly handsome in dark slacks and a button-down shirt that probably cost more than her monthly rent. But what struck Lauren most was the way his face lit up when he saw her. Genuine warmth and pleasure that had nothing to do with control or careful composure. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself," Lauren smiled, some of her nervousness easing. The restaurant was intimate and elegant without being ostentatious. They were seated at a corner table that offered both privacy and a view of the main dining room, and Lauren noticed Sebastian had positioned himself so he could see the entrance and exits. Old habits, probably. Professional instincts that never fully turned off. "So," Lauren said once they'd ordered wine and appetizers. "Tell me something most people don't know about you." Something beyond the work and the protection and the complicated life. Sebastian considered this, his dark eyes thoughtful. "I cook. Well, actually, it's meditative for me. The precision, the patience required, the process of creating something good from basic ingredients. I find it calming in ways nothing else in my life is." "That's unexpected." Lauren found herself smiling at the image of dangerous, controlled Sebastian in a kitchen creating meals. "What do you like to make?" "French cuisine mostly. Classic preparations that require technique. Coq au vin, bouillabaisse, proper beef bourguignon that takes 2 days to make correctly." Sebastian's voice held genuine enthusiasm. "It forces me to slow down, to focus on something that isn't about threat assessment or strategic planning. Just ingredients and heat and time. You'll have to cook for me sometime." Lauren said it without thinking, then felt heat creep up her neck at the presumption. "I'd like that." Sebastian's voice was warm. "Though fair warning, I'm particular about my kitchen. Anyone who wants to eat my cooking has to accept that I'm controlling about the process. I can work with that. I spend my professional life in controlled chaos. Having someone else be in control for a change sounds restful." They talked easily through appetizers and into the main course. Lauren learned that Sebastian spoke 3 languages, that he'd lived in Europe for 2 years after college, that he had a fear of heights that he'd had to conquer for work but had never fully overcome. Sebastian learned that Lauren played piano though she hadn't touched one in years, that she secretly wrote poetry when she couldn't sleep, that she'd always wanted to travel but had never had the time or money to do it properly. It was normal and comfortable and felt like they'd known each other for months rather than weeks. "Can I ask you something potentially uncomfortable?" Lauren said as they were finishing their meal. "Of course. What exactly do you do? I know you run private security. I know you operate in gray areas and have connections to dangerous people. But what does that actually mean day to day?" Sebastian was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Fair question. You deserve honesty about who you're having dinner with." He took a sip of wine. "I provide security and protection for people who need more than what legal channels can offer. Sometimes that's legitimate, protecting witnesses who are afraid of retaliation, providing security for people in dangerous business situations. Sometimes it's more complicated, helping people who are in debt to dangerous individuals negotiate solutions, protecting assets that might not be entirely legal, facilitating conversations between parties who don't trust traditional intermediaries. So you're not a criminal, but you work with criminals." "I'm someone who operates in the spaces between legal and illegal. I don't break laws directly, but I facilitate situations that sometimes involve illegal activities by others." Sebastian met her eyes steadily. "I've been trying for years to move my business toward purely legitimate work. It's slow going. The connections I have, the reputation I've built, they're valuable in certain circles, and completely abandoning them means giving up significant income and influence. But you're working toward it? Toward being completely legitimate? Yes. Sebastian's voice was firm. Because I don't want to be my father. He built this business on violence and intimidation and never cared about the ethical complications. I'm trying to transform it into something I can be proud of, even if that transformation takes years. Lauren absorbed this, appreciating his honesty, even as she grappled with the implications. Thank you for telling me. For not minimizing or hiding what your work involves. You deserve to make informed decisions about who you're spending time with. Sebastian reached across the table, taking her hand gently. And Lauren? I understand if this is too complicated. If knowing what I do makes you want to walk away, I'd be disappointed, but I'd understand. Lauren looked down at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of his touch and the weight of his words. She could walk away. Could thank him for dinner and the protection and the honesty, and return to her safe, uncomplicated life. But she'd never been good at choosing safe over meaningful. I'm not walking away, she said firmly. But I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll keep moving toward legitimate work. That you won't give up on becoming someone you can be proud of just because it's difficult or takes time. Lauren squeezed his hand. Because I want to know the person you're trying to become, not just the person you are right now. I promise. Sebastian's voice was rough with emotion. I want to be someone worthy of knowing you. Someone who can have a relationship that isn't complicated by questionable business dealings and gray area ethics. You're already worthy. Lauren said it with certainty. You just need to believe it yourself. They finished dinner talking about lighter things. Movies they wanted to see. Books they'd both read. Plans for future dates that felt simultaneously thrilling and wonderfully normal. When Sebastian walked her to her car later, he moved closer than he had before, his hand coming up to cup her face. Thank you, he said quietly. For tonight, for not running when I was honest about my life. For seeing something worth knowing despite the complications. Thank you for being honest. Lauren leaned into his touch. And for cooking French cuisine and reading philosophy and being infinitely more interesting than any security consultant has a right to be. Sebastian laughed, a real, genuine laugh, and then he kissed her. It was gentle and careful and somehow still intense, carrying the weight of everything they'd shared and everything they were building toward. When they finally broke apart, both breathing harder, Sebastian rested his forehead against hers. I'm falling for you, he admitted. Faster than is probably wise. But I can't seem to help it. Good. Lauren smiled against his lips. Because I'm falling too. And I'd hate to be doing it alone. They stood like that for a long moment in the parking lot, holding each other, both acknowledging that what had started as a rescue on a dark street had become something real and complicated and worth pursuing despite all the valid reasons it shouldn't work. When can I see you again? Sebastian asked. When do you cook? Lauren countered. I can cook this weekend. Saturday night at my place. If you're comfortable with that. I'm comfortable. Lauren kissed him once more, quick and sweet. Text me your address. I'll bring wine. Deal. Sebastian stepped back reluctantly. Get home safe. Text me when you're inside. Yes, sir. But Lauren was smiling as she said it. She drove home thinking about honest conversations and gentle kisses and a man who was trying to be better despite operating in a complicated world. Who'd protected her because it gave him peace of mind. Who looked at her like she was something precious and worth knowing. It was risky and complicated and probably inadvisable. But it was also real and honest and more alive than Lauren had felt in years. Her phone buzzed with a text before she even got out of her car. Made it home okay? From Sebastian. Lauren smiled and typed back. Safe and sound. Already looking forward to Saturday. His response was immediate. Me too. Sleep well, Lauren. Dream about perfectly cooked coq au vin and men who are trying very hard to deserve you. Lauren laughed and headed inside, her heart full of possibilities and her mind already planning what she'd wear to dinner at Sebastian's apartment. Sometimes the most dangerous choice led to the safest place. In the arms of someone who'd seen you at your most vulnerable and decided you were worth protecting anyway. Saturday night arrived with Lauren standing outside Sebastian's apartment building, holding a bottle of wine that the shop clerk had promised would pair perfectly with French cuisine, and trying to calm her nerves. This was different from their restaurant date. This was his private space, his home, the place where he existed beyond the controlled public persona. Accepting his invitation meant accepting a level of intimacy that went beyond casual dating. Lauren took a breath and buzzed his apartment. Sebastian answered immediately. His voice warmed through the intercom. Come on up. 10th floor. The building was as expensive and minimalist as Lauren had expected. All glass and steel in understated elegance. The elevator opened directly into Sebastian's penthouse apartment, and Lauren stepped into a space that somehow matched him perfectly. Open floor plan with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Minimal furniture, but what was there was clearly expensive and carefully chosen. Bookshelves lining one wall, filled with philosophy texts and classic literature. And a kitchen that looked like something from a culinary magazine, all professional-grade appliances, and immaculate countertops. Sebastian appeared from the kitchen, wearing dark jeans and a casual shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and somehow looking more attractive than he had in expensive suits. You found it okay? GPS works wonders. Lauren held up the wine. I was told this pairs well with French food, but I'm trusting the expertise of a wine shop clerk who looked about 23 and slightly terrified of me. Sebastian laughed and took the bottle. It's perfect, and dinner is almost ready. Can I get you something to drink while you wait? Whatever you're having. Sebastian poured them both wine and led Lauren to the kitchen, where something that smelled absolutely incredible was simmering on the stove. Coq au vin, as promised. Along with roasted vegetables and a salad that's more elaborate than it has any right to be. It smells amazing. Lauren settled onto a bar stool, watching Sebastian move around the kitchen with practiced ease. He was right about cooking being meditative. There was something calming about his movements, the focused attention he gave to taste testing and adjusting seasonings. How was your week? Sebastian asked as he worked. Exhausting. We had a bus accident that brought in 15 patients at once, and 2 of my colleagues are out with the flu. Lauren sipped her wine. But good exhausting. The kind where you know you made a difference even if you're dead tired at the end. You love your work. It wasn't a question. I do, even when it's hard. Even when I'm so tired I can barely stand. Lauren watched Sebastian's hands as he plated food with careful precision. What about you? How was your week? Complicated. I had a client situation that required delicate negotiation between parties who really didn't want to negotiate. Sebastian set a beautifully arranged plate in front of her. But it resolved well. Everyone walked away satisfied. Or at least satisfied enough to not cause problems. They ate at Sebastian's dining table, overlooking the city lights, and Lauren was reminded again that he operated in a completely different world than she did. This penthouse, the expensive furnishings, the casual mention of delicate negotiations. This was wealth and power she'd only ever encountered as an observer. What are you thinking? Sebastian asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. That your life is very different from mine. Lauren said it honestly. And wondering if that difference is something we can navigate long-term or if it'll eventually become a problem. Sebastian set down his fork, giving her his full attention. I've thought about that too. The differences between our worlds, our resources, our daily realities. And here's what I've concluded. The important things match. Our values, our goals, the way we see people and the world. The external differences are just logistics. Logistics like you having a penthouse and I rent a studio apartment. Lauren kept her voice light despite the underlying seriousness. Logistics like I have resources I want to share with someone I care about, and you have a life and work you're committed to that I want to support. Not disrupt. Sebastian reached across the table, taking her hand. I'm not looking for someone who fits into my world seamlessly. I'm looking for someone who makes me want to build a new world that works for both of us. That's a very philosophical way of saying you don't care that I'm not rich. But Lauren was smiling. I care that you're genuine and brave and that you save lives for a living while I navigate moral gray areas. Sebastian's voice was serious. I care that you make me want to be better. The money is just ... money. It's not the interesting part of who either of us is. Lauren squeezed his hand, feeling warmth spread through her chest at his words. You're very good at saying the right thing. I'm very good at being honest when it matters. Sebastian stood, pulling her up with him. Come here. I want to show you something. He led her to the windows overlooking the city. The view was breathtaking. Thousands of lights spreading out below them, the city alive and endless. Sebastian stood behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. See that building there? He pointed to a structure in the distance. That's Metropolitan General. I can see it from here. And for the past month, I've stood at these windows thinking about a stubborn nurse who refused to let me push her away despite having every reason to run from the complications I bring. Lauren leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. Is that what I am? Stubborn? Wonderfully, admirably stubborn. Sebastian's voice was soft against her ear. You decided I was worth knowing despite the gray areas and questionable connections. You looked past the dangerous exterior and saw someone trying to be better. That takes either courage or stubbornness, and I'm grateful for both. Lauren turned in his arms, looking up at his face. I saw someone who protected me without expecting anything in return. Who was honest about his flaws. Who's actively working to become someone he can be proud of. That's not stubbornness. That's recognition. Sebastian cupped her face, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. I'm falling in love with you. I probably have been since you called my emergency number and trusted me to handle that situation at your door, but I wanted you to know. Before this goes any further. Before you're too invested to walk away if my world becomes too complicated. I'm already too invested. Lauren said it without hesitation. And, Sebastian, I'm falling in love with you too. With the philosophy reading security consultant who cooks French food and protects strangers because it gives him peace of mind. With the man who's trying to be better despite operating in impossible circumstances. He kissed her then, and it was different from their first kiss. Deeper, more certain, carrying the weight of feelings acknowledged and futures being imagined. Lauren let herself sink into it, into him, accepting that she'd made a choice weeks ago on a dark street to trust this dangerous man. And that choice had led her exactly where she needed to be. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Sebastian rested his forehead against hers. Stay tonight. Not for anything physical. Just stay. Let me fall asleep knowing you're here and safe and real. Okay. Lauren said it simply, certainly. I'll stay. They spent the rest of the evening talking on Sebastian's couch, wrapped around each other, sharing stories and hopes and fears in the easy intimacy that came from accepting you'd found something rare and worth protecting. Eventually, they moved to his bedroom, and Lauren fell asleep in his arms, feeling safer than she'd ever felt despite knowing that the man holding her was someone most people feared. Sebastian lay awake long after Lauren had drifted off, watching her sleep, marveling at the trust she'd placed in him. He'd spent years building walls, maintaining distance, accepting that his life meant isolation. And then a woman's car had broken down in front of him on a dark street, and somehow that random moment had led to this, holding someone he loved, who loved him back, who saw past his dangerous reputation to the person underneath. It was terrifying and wonderful and worth every complication. In the morning, Lauren woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Sebastian moving around the kitchen. She found him making breakfast with the same focused attention he'd given to dinner. And something about the domestic normalcy of it made her chest ache. Morning, he said when he noticed her. Coffee's ready. Breakfast in 5 minutes. You cook breakfast too? Lauren settled onto a bar stool, accepting the coffee he offered. I cook everything. It's my thing. Sebastian smiled. Though I'm better at dinner than breakfast. This is just eggs and toast and fruit. Nothing impressive. It's perfect. And it was, not because of the food, but because of the man making it, and the easy comfort of existing in his space, and the way he looked at her like she was the most important thing in his perfectly controlled world. They ate breakfast talking about their plans for the day. Lauren had a shift that afternoon. Sebastian had meetings he couldn't cancel. But they made plans for later in the week, for another dinner, or maybe a movie, or just time together that didn't involve crisis or protection or anything complicated. When it was time for Lauren to leave, Sebastian walked her to the elevator, his hand warm in hers. Thank you for staying. For trusting me enough to be vulnerable in my space. Thank you for asking me to. Lauren kissed him softly. And for the coq au vin and the honest conversations and the view of the city. I'll remember last night for a long time. Good. Sebastian's arms tightened around her briefly. Because I'm planning on creating a lot more nights worth remembering. Lauren left his building thinking about possibilities and futures, and a man who'd stopped to help her on a dark street and ended up becoming someone she couldn't imagine her life without. It was fast and risky and complicated in ways that should have made her more cautious. But sometimes the most dangerous choices led to the safest places. Sometimes the man everyone else feared was exactly the person who made you feel most protected. And sometimes, one broken-down car on a deserted street changed absolutely everything. 3 months later, when Lauren's lease was up, she didn't renew it. She moved into Sebastian's penthouse, bringing her chaos and clutter into his minimalist space, and somehow making it feel more like home than either of them had experienced in years. 6 months after that, Sebastian successfully transitioned the last of his questionable clients to legitimate security work, finally building the business he'd always wanted. One he could be proud of, one that didn't require moral compromises or operating in gray areas. And through it all, Lauren was there. Stubborn and brave and reminding him every day that he was more than his reputation, more than his complicated past, more than the dangerous world he'd operated in. Sometimes the person you rescued ended up rescuing you right back. Sometimes a woman's car broke down at exactly the right moment in exactly the right place. And sometimes, the man who stopped to help on a dark street was exactly the person you'd been waiting for without knowing you were waiting.